Life in the Haemonculus grip, the cruelty of the Dark Eldar, Warhammer 40,000. By the time I learned that mercy could be stolen, I had already used it to damn the only person who had trusted me. In the lower tiers of Commorragh, where the walls breathe and beg to be fed, death is not an ending. It is a tool, and I put that tool into the hands of the master. Here is what I know about blood. Imperial blood is thick, dark, almost brown when it dries. There is so much iron in it that it rusts on metal if you do not wipe it away in the first few minutes. It sinks into the seams between the tiles and leaves a rusty halo that no solvent can lift. I have tried them all. Nothing helps. Eldari blood is different. A shade lighter, almost scarlet and slick. It does not dry. For hours it remains a liquid puddle, as if it refuses to die. It washes away more easily, but it leaves a sharp rasp in the throat. Tau blood is watery, bluish, entirely different, unfamiliar, almost impossible to describe. I had never seen anything like it in all my years of medical work. There is no keeping time here. There are no days. Only long, grinding shifts, nightmare procedures, and those rare scraps of rest between them. And right now, under my feet, there is a puddle, a mixture of red and phosphorescent green. The green is bioluminescent fluid from the spinal canal. When they open the spine, it is the first thing that pours out. I have been running the mop over this stain for 20 minutes already. Wet slap, drag, wring, bucket. Slap, drag, wring. The rhythm is like prayer. The only prayer left to me in this emperor-forsaken place. Behind me is the operating table. On it are the remains of what was still Kent this morning. I try not to look. I have learned that it is not worth it. Eyes down on the floor. Hands in gloves, black industrial gloves up to the elbows, rubber as thick as a finger. They save the skin, but they do not save you from the smell. The smell slips through the respirator, through the pores, through every layer of clothing. Afterward it clings to you for another full day, like an unwanted guest you cannot show to the door. The ventilation growled above my head, low and hoarse, as if someone were dying beyond the wall. I wrung out the mop again and looked into the bucket. Greenish sludge with brown streaks. You might even think it beautiful if you did not know what it was. Unfortunately, I knew. I knew the composition. I knew the origin of every shade. I could have delivered a lecture to young physicians. No, that is not where I should begin. My name is Owen March. Once I was a medic. Once I swore an oath to do no harm. Here, in the lower tiers of Commorragh, in the laboratories of the coiled spiral coven, that oath has become the funniest and most absurd thing I have ever said in my life. Funnier than rescue will come. Funnier than the Emperor protects. Funnier than everything will be all right. Now I am an orderly, a cleaner, the one who comes after the nightmares that happen in this room. They sculpt. I wipe up after them. It is time to tell you how a man who used to bring water to the sick became a man who takes a scalpel in his hand and does to others what was done to him. Because if I do not tell it, if I do not shape it into a story with a beginning and a clear end, then everything that happened will remain only pain. And pain without words is exactly what they feed on, what they love most. I would rather not feed them with the last thing I have. The corridors here are alive. They pulse, they breathe, literally. Inhale, exhale, slowly like a sleeping, exhausted beast. The walls are made from the flesh of altered bodies, prisoners and slaves, those who were no longer useful for anything else. Their tissues were fused, grown again, turned into building material, living insulation. The temperature in the corridors is always the same, the temperature of a healthy human body. Once each shift, I feed them. I drag a hose from the reservoir of nutrient mixture, cloudy and beige and smelling of sour milk, and push the nozzle straight into the openings in the walls. The valves in the wall look like lips. That is how they eat. Sometimes the wall moans softly, from deep inside, like a man waking from some dreadful dream. I try to finish feeding quickly, though I suppose I have grown used to it. It is still a vile task, revolting in a way that never truly fades. Once I heard a real word, one single word in Gothic, hoarse and drawn out. Sing. I froze with the hose nozzle in my hand. The mixture dripped slowly onto the floor. The hum spread through the ventilation and the walls kept breathing. I waited a minute, then two. The wall said nothing more. That day I poured a double portion into it. Afterward, for reasons I still do not understand, I pressed my cheek to the wall. It was warm and damp like the skin of a sick man. And somewhere deep inside, beyond layers of reworked flesh, I felt a pulse. Slow and heavy, like the footsteps of a giant from a children's tale. Since then the wall has not spoken to me again, but every shift I have tried to give it a double portion. Why, I do not know. Perhaps because it was the only request I could fulfill, the only help I could offer in this cruel place. The laboratories of the coiled spiral coven lie in the lower tiers of Commorragh. The dark city is a nightmare in itself, but what lies below, in the lower reaches of the webway, is another order of madness. Spires stretch not only upward but downward too, like stalactites, piercing layers of space that obey neither human reason nor human logic. In those inverted towers, in labyrinths of mirrors and spiral pits with narrow walkways, live the Haemonculus, masters of flesh. For them, the body is a canvas, and pain is the palette. I learned about the webway from an old man. Slaves did not speak much among themselves. By the third month, most had their tongues taken or their vocal cords torn. But the old man I called Walter lasted surprisingly long. He came from some ordinary Imperial world. He had worked as a repair technician at a cargo terminal. He was taken with 300 others during another raid. Commorragh is not in our universe, Walter told me when we sat in a nook between the walls, chewing a lump of nutrient paste I had stolen from the feeding reservoir. The webway is corridors, old corridors, impossibly old, built before everything. The Eldar walked them when mankind did not yet exist. Commorragh is a city built right in the middle of those corridors, hidden with care. No Imperial chart will show it. No navigator will feel it out. We are beyond everything, lad. Walter disappeared 2 days after that conversation. I found his food cloth in the corner where he usually slept. It was folded neatly. On it lay his charm, a bent coin with the half-worn profile of the Emperor. Walter would not have left it willingly, so they took him in the night, quietly. I took the coin for myself. It still lies in my pocket. Aboard the Imperial freighter the Third Grace, I served as a third-class medici. Ship surgeon. It sounds proud. In truth, I treated burns in the engine decks, stitched knife wounds after sailors fought, and delivered children twice. An ordinary life. Gray, cramped but familiar, every day the same. Wake, inspection, treatment, paperwork, sleep. Recycled air, recycled days. I dreamed of being discharged planetside of a clinic somewhere in a quiet corner of an agri-world. A small waiting room, 2 beds, a line of farmers with palms cut by sickles. A boring, quiet, normal life. I was 32, and I thought there were decades of honorable service ahead of me. How naive I was. Then the ships came out of the dark. We were passing through the Gethrin system, an empty sector, nothing of interest. A transit route the Grace had crossed hundreds of times. Captain Herrick had not even ordered battle stations. Why would he? There was usually nothing there to fear. Not that time. The first strike hit the engines. No explosion, no flash. Only a clean surgical cut like a scalpel drawn over skin. The ship shuddered. Then again. Then everything plunged into darkness when the main lighting died. Emergency lamps flooded the corridors in red, and I saw cracks running along the walls. They were cutting us open. Black angular ships like shards of a broken mirror. Cutting beams sliced the hull with speed and precision, doing no needless damage. They did not want the ship. They wanted us, its contents. I ran toward the infirmary. Habit. When something goes wrong, a medic runs to the infirmary, grabs the bag, prepares the table, sterilizes instruments. A reflex hammered into the hindbrain by 10 years of practice. I ran. The deck trembled underfoot. Pipes burst around me, hot steam hissing from the walls. Someone was shouting that we had to get to the escape craft. What escape craft? The Grace had 4 rescue pods for 1,200 crew. We all knew they were decoration for the protocol, for the report. The deck beneath me split cleanly, with a crystalline ring, as if someone had drawn a glass cutter across it. I remember screams around me. I remember light, bright, cutting, white, unlike anything human. Light that made you want to close your eyes and never open them again. Light that crawled into the skull and burned away thought as acid burns through whatever it touches. I remember hands long and thin, with skin whiter than paper, seizing me by the throat. The fingers were icy, and they smelled of flowers. Some kind of flowers I had never smelled before and probably never would see. A sweet, choking fragrance that made my skull ring and my knees buckle. Then came darkness. I woke in a cage among hundreds of other poor souls. The first days, or what I thought were days, were the worst. There is no sun here. The sky of Commorragh is a false sun caught in the lenses of the webway, hanging in the void like lamps over an operating table. Eternal twilight, crimson light, and screams. Screams everywhere always, from every direction. They do not stop, and the strangest thing is that in time you grow used to even that nightmare. There were 12 of us in the cage, all standing. We could not sit. It was too tight. A sailor named Bram, huge and red-bearded, with an anchor tattooed on his neck, spent the first hours pounding his fists against the bars and roaring that he would tear those skinny freaks to rags. By the 3rd hour he fell silent. By the 6th he wept. By the 12th he no longer reacted at all. He stood and stared at one point while saliva ran down his chin. They sorted us quickly. The strong to the arenas, to the witch cults, the beautiful to the houses of archons for amusement, the sick to reprocessing. They took Bram to the arenas. He walked obediently, like an ox to slaughter, and did not even look back. One of the racks noticed me when I bandaged the wound of the man beside me in the cage, purely out of habit. My hands had done it countless times before. The lad had a ragged wound on his upper arm where the shackles had stripped the skin down to meat. I made a tourniquet from a strip torn from a sleeve, a pressure dressing, a reflex driven into me by 10 years of ship service. A rack is a junior servant of a Haemonculus, a thing that was once Drukhari and has become an instrument. Instead of faces, they wear iron masks. Beneath the skin are implants that force the body to keep working long after the mind has gone dark. They are something between surgeon and puppet, lower acolytes of the coven, initiated through a procedure that leaves only obedience and skill where a person used to be. That particular rack, I called him Hush because he never made a sound, grabbed my wrist, pulled my hands through the bars and turned them this way and that like a buyer inspecting goods at market. He felt the fingers, tested the movement of the joints, traced every tendon. I stood pinned between the bars and other bodies and could not move. Then Hush opened the cage, dragged me out, and pulled me after him past other cages, past faces, past hands clutching at bars, past the sorting hall where prisoners screamed, down a spiral stair whose steps were made of some strange material that yielded underfoot, warm and soft. I tried not to think about what it had been made from. That is how I became an orderly. The work was simple: wash the floor, wipe the tables, dispose of waste. Waste means, well, you understand, what remains after the procedures, pieces, sometimes things that still move. During the first month I vomited after every shift. During the second, every other shift. By the 3rd I stopped. The stomach surrendered before the mind. The body adapted as it adapts to anything. Cold, hunger, the daily sight of bodies turned inside out. Man is an astonishing machine. He breaks, but he keeps working. Like a generator with a burned-out fuse. It sparks smokes but keeps turning and doing what it was made to do. There was a hierarchy among the slaves. I learned it quickly from bruises. At the very bottom were the fresh ones, those who had just arrived. They screamed, cried, prayed. They were used for everything: test pieces, spare parts, food for the walls. Above them were hands, slaves with useful skills, technicians, orderlies, strong carriers. That was where I ended up. Hands lived longer because they had a function. Replacing a hand takes time and effort. For Haemonculus, it was easier to preserve than to search for another. Higher still were eyes. Slaves trusted to watch other slaves. Informers. Among them were creatures of different races. I saw one Tau without arms who remembered everything he saw and reported every last event. Phenomenal memory and attention. At the top, just below the racks, were tongues, translators, those who had learned the language of the Drukhari and could pass on orders. There were few tongues, and they clung to their place with their teeth, sometimes literally. Once Hush shoved me while I was carrying a bucket, just like that in passing with his shoulder. I fell. The bucket overturned, and its contents, hot, caustic, stinking of ammonia, spilled over my legs. The burns took 2 weeks to heal. The skin peeled away in sheets. Every step hurt so badly that the world seemed to swim before my eyes. Hush did not even turn around. For him it was ordinary. A fleeting impulse, a tiny dose of another person's suffering collected on the move. I did not get angry. Anger had long since evaporated from me, like that same fluid from the overturned bucket. Only weariness remained. Dense, heavy, like the lead apron I used to wear before the X-ray unit aboard the 3rd Grace so many years ago. As if that had been another life, another universe, where the word grace still meant something. The raid came back at night. I know because the laboratories fell quiet. The master had gone to an Archon's feast, and we slaves received a few hours of respite. I slept on the floor beside the disposal unit. It was warm. It gave off a hum I had learned to accept as a lullaby. The disposal unit reprocessed surgical waste, and at night when there was no work, it hummed softly at idle. My private hearth, my little stove. The only warm place in Commorragh I could call mine. Then the thunder began. A portal opened at the far end of the corridor. Green light, the kind that makes your teeth ache in your mouth, and through it poured dozens of unfamiliar figures, shouting, howling, wheezing, bound in luminous shackles that drove the finest needles into their skin with every movement. I had seen such shackles before. They skimmed fear, pain, despair like cream from milk, and drove it through thin living cables into collectors. The Drukhari fed on suffering literally as we feed on bread. Every cry, every sob, every drop of terror. All of it was food, energy, currency. An economy, nothing else. I lived in its filthiest workshop. Next came the sorting hall, a long room with a low ceiling and a sickly yellow light. Prisoners are lined up. Racks move between them, feeling muscles, looking into teeth, poking fingers into ribs, counting bones. One of the racks, the one other slaves called Snap, had a habit of breaking prisoners' little fingers to test the pain threshold. He worked quickly, masterfully. Step close, examine, mark the forehead with fluorescent paint. Green for the arenas, blue for the houses of Archons, red for reprocessing, white for the Coven laboratories. I stood to one side with a bucket and cloth in case one of the prisoners pissed himself from fear. Many did. Some did worse. The human body, when true animal terror closes over it, stops obeying. That is what I learned here, and they did not teach it in medical school. Fear is not only emotion. It is a physical process, a chemical reaction that can be measured, collected, and consumed. She stood in the middle of the line. Tall, straight-backed, hair cut short in the military style even before captivity. An Imperial Navy uniform, gray, with logistics patches. A lieutenant, judging by the insignia. One of those people used to giving orders. Used to the world obeying, to regulations and order, to every action having a paragraph behind it. She shouted fiercely, quoted fleet regulations, demanded proper protocol for captured personnel. Article 14, Paragraph 6, Evacuation and retention of Imperial property. Property of His Divine Majesty is not subject to alien seizure. She shouted it clearly, in a trained command voice, staring straight into the mask of the nearest rack. Snap slowly turned his head, curious, then hit her in the stomach. She bent double, coughed, straightened, and began again. Quieter, but with the same iron core in her voice. She demanded the rank and name of the senior officer, demanded access to an astropath. Snap hit her again. She dropped to one knee, rose, and continued. Hoarse now, spitting blood onto the floor I would later have to wash. I looked at her and saw myself. That version of myself I had buried deep inside long ago. The fool who in the first week of captivity also believed in rules, regulations, that someone would come and take us home. I shouted too, demanded, explained that I was a citizen of the Imperium, that I had rights. I remember that week poorly, probably for the best. They sent me to shave her head. Standard procedure before surgery. Haemonculus do not like hair on working material. I took the razor, old, with a rusted blade, and approached. She looked at me. Gray eyes, pupils wide, a burst capillary in the left, a red stain on the white. She was 35, maybe 40, an old pale battle scar on her chin, the sort of scar she had probably been proud of. Probably told the story of it in the officer's mess, how she got it, for what, in which skirmish. "You are human," she whispered with her lips alone. "Help me, please." I began to shave. Hair fell to the floor, dark with early silver, stiff and unruly. The rusted blade caught, and she winced but did not pull away. "Save your strength," I whispered back, eyes on my work. Screams please them. Silence is the only thing you can refuse to pay. "They will come for us," she whispered. My ship transmitted the coordinates. The Imperial fleet. I shaved the last strip above her right ear. The bare head was pale, the skull shape neat, even. The master would like it. "Commorragh is not on any map," I said still more softly. "It is in the webway between worlds. Even if your fleet somehow found an entrance, the chance of pulling out a prisoner is almost nothing. Sometimes someone gets lucky, but no one prays to luck here." I finished the work in silence and left. Her hair remained on the floor. I came back a minute later with the broom. I swept the hair into a pan dark with silver, soft, still warm. I threw it into the disposal unit. The unit chewed. Her name was Mara Thorne. I learned it later from the marking on her cage. Mara Thorne, Lieutenant, Logistics Service, Battleship Implacable, now Specimen 409. 3 cages away from her sat an elderly man, a ship chaplain, judging by the worn Aquila tattoo on his forehead. He prayed softly, pressing his palms to the bars. His lips never stopped moving. They took him for reprocessing the next day. Red mark. He walked calmly, still moving his lips. The prayer did not break off. It simply grew quieter as they led him down the corridor. Quieter, quieter. Then, as usual, the wall swallowed every sound. The master's operating chamber is the cleanest place to be found in the laboratories. Walls of polished black stone. Here they are not made of flesh. The master believed the flesh of walls distracted from the flesh on the table. Instruments stand on racks of dark glass, sorted by size. Scalpels, bone saws, injectors, probes. Thousands of items, and each has its place. The master demands absolute order. It is the only thing in which I agree with him. The only thing that still connected me, a former Medici, to this creature that seems older than any human civilization. The master is. I searched for words for a long time and never found them. Drukhari lived for millennia, Haemonculus even longer. My master is so ancient that his body has long since stopped being what it was born as. 6 limbs, 4 arms and 2 legs. Although the legs are more like supports, jointed like a spider's. Skin pale to the edge of blue, stretched over a protruding spine that continues beyond the body as a tail of bony segments. a narrow, elongated face with eyes like drops of black mercury. He never blinks. In all the cycles I spent near him, not once. I watched. He had habits, small rituals. I studied the way one studies the behavior of a predator whose cage one lives in. Before work he always washed his hands, all four of them in a bowl of liquid, not simply for sterility. For Haemonculus, infection does not exist. They control every microorganism as a conductor controls an orchestra. The washing was a ritual before creation. After that he arranged the instruments himself, trusting neither the racks nor me. He moved them by millimeters until their placement satisfied his sense of symmetry. It took 10 to 15 minutes. The rack stood motionless. I stood motionless too. The prisoner on the table screamed, twitched, wheezed. The master paid no attention. The instruments mattered more. And when everything was ready, he began to hum softly, melodically in the Drukhari tongue, which sounds like a blade sliding over silk. The melody was always the same. I heard it hundreds of times and still could not remember it. I tried to reproduce it. I could not. As if the melody were made of something the human brain cannot receive and hold. Mara was brought in on the third day after her arrival. I stood beside the instrument rack. My work was to hand over whatever the master commanded by gesture, by a twitch of a finger, by a tilt of the head. He never speaks while he works, only hums. Over cycles beside him I learned to read his gestures as a deaf man reads lips. The little finger of the upper right hand trembles slightly. Third scalpel, second row. The head inclines left. Small clamp with lock. A pause in the humming. Swab, always a swab on the pause. They laid her on the table and fastened her with straps made of something alive, something that contracted and adapted to the body's movement. When she struggled, the straps tightened. When she stilled, they loosened. Breathing shackles. She did not scream. She only stared at the ceiling. Her jaw was clenched so hard that the muscles stood out along her cheekbones. The master approached and bent over her. His 4 hands fluttered above her body like a pianist's hands over keys. He studied, felt muscles through the skin, ran fingers along the ribs as he counted, tilted his head and narrowed his eyes like an artist judging a canvas. I knew he saw not only a body, but an entire project. The master was proud that he made grotesques from a single piece. Clean work, I once heard from one of the tongues translating his words. No seams, no compromises. Other Haemonculus stitched monsters from many bodies. 4 arms from 4 donors, 2 heads, extra organs. My master considered that vulgar. He took one prisoner and rebuilt that prisoner completely. Bone by bone, muscle by muscle, nerve by nerve. Then he sang. The first incision ran along the collarbone. Shallow, not to cause pain, but to see how the muscle reacted. With 2 hands he spread the edges of the wound. With a third he took a probe and drew it over the exposed tissue. Mara hissed through her teeth. The master tilted his head, interested. The 4th hand, the lower left, made notes on something like a slate. Scalpel, he gestured to me. 3rd from the left, 2nd row. I handed it to him. I stood beside him and watched. The professional part of my mind, the part that still remembered medical school, recorded everything. Here he cuts the deltoid. Here he exposes the shoulder joint. Here he carefully moves aside the radial nerve and injects something into the muscle tissue. A thin syringe with a needle as long as a palm, full of liquid the color of molten gold. Mara screamed for the first time. Her body arched. The straps drew tight. The living bonds contracted. The master patiently waited until she stopped thrashing. The melody did not break for a single moment, and he continued. His purpose was not torture. That is what you must understand. For him this was a form of warped, mad creation. Like a sculptor who sees the future statue inside a block of marble, the master saw a future grotesque in Mara's body. 3 meters of muscle and fury. A war machine capable of tearing ceramite with bare hands. All that was needed was to recut the body from one piece. Clean work. The process takes months, sometimes years. First injections, growth hormones, macrosteroids, muscular stimulants, each dose calculated to the microgram. Then ostovals that force the bones to grow, thicken, jut outward into spikes. The bones are literally redrawn the way one rewrites a plan, thicker here, longer there, a new joint here. Then comes the replacement of limbs, organs, face, and finally the last thing, lobotomy, an iron mask over whatever remains, an obedient beast that does not dream. That first day the master worked for 4 hours. He introduced stimulants into both arms, reinforced the shoulder joints with metal rods, manipulated the abdominal cavity, and did something to the adrenal glands. I handed him instruments and changed blood-soaked cloths. When he finished, Mara was unconscious. The master stepped back, wiping each hand separately, methodically, beginning with the fingers. He looked at me, or rather through me, as through dirty glass, and left without even a nod. To him, I was only part of the furniture and instruments, a mop that sometimes handed over scalpels and put things in order. I cleaned the operating chamber, placed every instrument back in its exact position, millimeter by millimeter, wiped the table, carried out the buckets of what remained after 4 hours of surgery. More than seems possible. 2 full buckets. Brown, thick, warm. When I passed her cage, already moved, already locked, she was conscious, staring at the ceiling. Her lips moved. I pressed my ear to the bars. She was reciting the standard Imperial prayer. Emperor, shield my soul from darkness and grant me strength to endure the trial, for I am your faithful servant, and in death I shall find your light. Her voice was quiet, even without tremor, like a metronome. I stepped away so she would not see my face, because my face would have given her a truth it was still too early for her to know. My dear, naive girl, no light reaches this place. Prayer is only words of hope, and here those words are worth exactly nothing. Time here is like a thick, viscous substance. Days do not replace one another. They layer themselves like brushstrokes on a madman's canvas. A dark stroke, a darker one, another and another, until nothing remains but one solid black rectangle without beginning or end. I stopped counting shifts. I simply marked the changes in Mara as a doctor marks the progress of disease. Diagnosis, transformation. Prognosis, irreversible. Week 2, muscle mass doubled. The skin stretched, reddened, covered itself with a net of burst capillaries. She screamed with pain when the stimulants activated every 6 hours exactly on schedule. The cry, low, drawn out, no longer entirely female, traveled through 3 corridors, through walls of living flesh, and reached my nook by the disposal unit. I learned to fall asleep to it, another adaptation. Week 3, 20 centimeters of growth. Bones lengthened, broke, and knitted again according to the master's design. I saw the X-ray, if it can be called an X-ray. The Coven's device looked more like an eye on a stand, staring through flesh. And what was happening inside her looked like a construction site. Scaffolds, spans, supports. Temporary metal structures holding the bones while they grew. Week 4. The master replaced her eyes. He cut them out neatly, with surgical precision that any Imperial surgeon would envy, and inserted sensors. Red lenses in black housings, connected to the optic nerve by the thinnest wires like a silver web. Now when she turned her head there was a soft whir, focus. I was present for that operation. I handed instruments. I held the bowl into which the master carefully lowered both eyeballs. Gray irises, widened pupils. They looked at me from the bowl, 2 gray eyes in pink fluid. Later I carried them to the disposal unit. Between operations, I came to her cage to change dressings. The master did not want her to die of infection before the work was complete. Sepsis was the only thing that could spoil his peace, so I was silently permitted to enter with bandages and antiseptic. Drukari antiseptic burned like fire, but healed in hours what Imperial medicine would have spent weeks repairing. Once after the eyes, she spoke. "You again." Her voice was quiet, hoarse, broken, different from before. The voice of a person who had screamed so long that the cords had begun to tear. "Dressings," I said. I crouched beside her and began unwinding the old bandage from her forearm, where a rod emerged from the bone. The skin around the rod was purple, swollen, hot. "How long has it been?" "I do not know. My ship is not coming." I said it softly but firmly. Pity is poison here, worse than poison. False hope kills more slowly but more surely. I knew that from myself, from my own first weeks, when every sound beyond the wall seemed like rescue. She was silent while I worked. The new sensor eyes watched me, red points in the darkness of the cage. "What are they doing to me?" I could have lied, said they were preparing her for exchange, for sale, for something that at least left a chance. But I was too tired for lies. Lying takes energy, and mine had run out long ago. "A grotesque," I said, "a war creature, 3 meters of muscle, bone blades instead of hands, an iron mask instead of a face. When they finish, you will not remember who you were. You will remember nothing, only orders." The red sensor lenses turned toward the ceiling. "How many have you seen?" "Many, I stopped counting." "And none?" "No." "I want water," she said at last. Water was forbidden. Prisoners received only nutrient mixture through tubes directly into the stomach. But I had a flask, dented tin, filled with water I had saved sip by sip from condensation on the ventilation pipes. The water was warm, real, clean, luxury. I held the flask to the bars. She drank for a long time, greedily, spilling it over herself. Water ran down her chin, her neck, her bandages. She closed her sensor eyes. The red points went out, and for a second, one brief second, her face became what it had been before. Before the marking, before the cage, before everything. "Thank you," she said. "What is your name?" "Owen." "Mara, though you probably know." I nodded. "Owen." She turned her head. The sensors whirred softly, focusing on my face. "I am still human." I looked at her. At the arms, swollen, braided through with metal rods, the skin darkened by injections. At the body, swelling, outgrowing itself. No longer female, no longer male, just mass that grew and grew without stopping. At the face, still human, still recognizable, but already framed by red sensor lenses instead of eyes. "Yes," I said, "you are human." I lied, and she knew I lied, and I knew she knew. But the lie was necessary to us both. A small ritual like prayer, meaningless and necessary. Week 6. They replaced her hands. I came in the morning and saw bone blades where her palms had been. Long, curved, with serrated edges. They grew straight from the forearms, from bones the master had redirected, forced through the skin, flattened into crescent knives. She lay on her side, curled up, pressing those blades to her chest the way a child holds a toy. She no longer cried. She had no tear glands anymore, but her entire body trembled with a fine, constant shiver. I sat beside her in silence and held out the flask. "I cannot," she whispered. "I cannot hold it, no fingers." I brought the flask to her lips. She drank, and the water ran over the blades that had once been the hands of Lieutenant Mara Thorne. "Tell me something," she asked. "Anything about your life outside." I thought about what to tell. What did I remember? The engine room of the Third Grace. My closet-sized cabin, where I slept on a bunk bolted to the wall. The mess, where 300 people chewed the same gray porridge beneath flickering dull lamps. On the ship where I served, there was a servo skull. Old, soot-stained, with a crack across the whole frontal bone. We called him Lantern, I think. There was always a little emergency lamp above him, yellow and cheap. It flickered horribly when the power acted up. "A servo skull?" she asked. "A former junior tech priest, maybe, or a senior mechanic. No one really remembered. He was supposed to patrol the engine decks and look for steam leaks. Instead, he flew through the corridors and recited temperature and pressure readings every time someone sneezed, very loudly, in binary. She laughed. "Tell me more." When the ship entered the warp, lanterns started banging against the wall near the Jeller field generators. Every time. Knock, 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 and his lamp flashed until someone came and read him a calming prayer to the Omnissiah. The engineers joked that he had a built-in corruption sensor. The tech priests, for their part, recorded the readings. Her shoulders shook, that same hoarse little laugh. Once he flew into the ventilation and got stuck between two heat sinks. Technicians spent 3 hours taking the paneling apart to get him out. Captain Harrick personally commanded the operation. Then he shouted that this holy flying rubbish had cost the fleet more than repairs to a plasma circuit. And did he? Mara turned her head, the sensors whirred softly. Did he understand? I looked at her hands, at the bone blades pressed to her chest, at the metal sticking out of flesh, at the face that was becoming less human by the day. "I do not know," I said, "probably not. But sometimes he stopped beside people who were hurting, just hovered there and blinked that stupid lamp of his, silent as if keeping watch." She was quiet for a long time. "Lantern," she whispered, "funny." Suddenly I felt sick. Because in a week or two she would no longer remember the servo skull, or the yellow lamp, or the word funny. The stimulants were doing their work. The brain was being rebuilt. Neural connections broke and were replaced with new ones, sharpened for one purpose: obedience and aggression. Week 8, she stopped speaking, she lowed. Words fell apart like wet paper. She would begin a sentence and lose it halfway through as if the thought dissolved. The last thing she said to me clearly was, "Yellow lamp blinking." That was all. After that, only one long moan, "Poor thing." I still came. Changed dressings, brought water. Sometimes I simply sat beside her and told her about Lantern, about the Third Grace, about the gray porridge in the mess, and about the storm I once saw on a transfer station. A real storm with lightning and rain on the Agri-World Proxima 4. She did not understand the words, but when I sat near the bars, the red sensors turned toward me, and the body, huge, swollen, ugly, relaxed a little. As if something deep inside, some remnant of Mara, still remembered the warmth of human company. Human warmth nearby. I recorded everything in my head. A catalog of losses. The exact moment when the light of hope goes out in another person's eyes. A quiet click, almost gentle like a switch. I saw it dozens of times on the table, in cages, in corridors. The moment a person stops believing they will get out and something inside them goes dark, the body remains. It still moves out of habit, still breathes, still reacts to pain, but the soul inside seems already gone. I found the Coven Heart Stopper by chance. I was cleaning after another procedure. Ordinary work, ordinary mess. The master had been experimenting with some new formula, and dozens of broken and used ampules lay on the floor. Glass, liquids in 3 colors, poisonous vapors that the respirator barely stopped. My eyes watered. My throat burned. I breathed through a cloth, as in the first months before they issued the respirator. One ampule was whole, cracked but the neck intact with liquid still trapped inside. Thick dark violet with an oily gleam. I recognized it. Among ourselves, the slaves who had lived long enough in the laboratories to know, we called it lethe salt. The Coven Heart Stopper. It stops the heart in seconds, without pain, without convulsions. The master used it in microdoses to test cardiac muscle regeneration. For Drukhari, who can raise the dead, cardiac arrest is not an end, but an instrument. The calibration tap of a hammer. I looked at the ampule. My palms sweated. My hands, the same hands that trembled every morning when I took the mop, suddenly stopped trembling. I felt a sudden calm and certainty, like in an operating room, like back on the Third Grace when I had to stitch a torn wound on a sailor whose finger had been ripped off on duty. Blood spurted in a fountain. Everyone shouted. and my hands worked steadily. The hands knew what to do. I took a syringe from the pocket of my apron, an old disposable one I carried in case I ever needed to inject myself with painkiller. I drew the liquid from the ampule. The violet fluid in the clear cylinder of the syringe looked beautiful. I remember thinking, beautiful death, and the thought startled me. Mara already weighed more than 200 kilograms, but her body, stuffed with stimulants, was weakened. The heart was wearing itself out. I had heard it pounding when I changed her dressings. A frantic, uneven rhythm, arrhythmia on every third beat. Half a liter would be enough. I hid the syringe in a dirty cloth, the cloth in a bucket, and the bucket in a niche near the disposal room entrance. An ordinary place no one touched. Old cloths, empty containers, a broken hose nozzle, refuse not yet sent for reprocessing. For 3 days I walked past that niche and felt anxiety because of the hidden syringe. Physically, like pressure behind the breastbone, like a second heartbeat. It was there, waiting for its moment. That knowledge spread through my whole body as a strange sensation. Not exactly relief. Something like control. A small, pathetic splinter of power in a world where I had nothing. Not a name. To them I was a number, a function, an orderly. Not a body. It had long belonged to the coven. Not a future. What future does a rag have? But the syringe was my choice. The decision was mine alone. And for the first time in all my time here, I could affect something. 3 days passed. I lay by the disposal unit staring at the ceiling and thought. In the Imperium, what I am about to do would be called murder. But when life has already been taken from you piece by piece, day by day, with every movement of a scalpel, what does the last injection take? A shell, a scrap, an echo. I wanted to give her what is impossible here. An ending. Neat, quick, painless, mercy. True and honest mercy. On the 4th day, Hush checked my inventory. Ordinary procedure. Every few shifts, racks count cloths, buckets, chemicals. They make sure slaves have not hidden anything that could be used for suicide. Here, suicide is considered theft. You deprive the masters of a valuable resource. Yourself. Hush approached the niche. My pulse jumped. I felt the vein in my temple beating. Fast, desperate, he reached for the bucket. I doubled over and began to cough, loud and tearing, as if turning myself inside out. Then I fell to my knees and vomited on the floor. Truly made myself vomit by pressing the root of my tongue. I still knew how to do that. An old trick from medical school. The instructor had shown us how to help a poisoning patient. Now I used it to deceive a jailer. What irony! Bile, saliva, remnants of nutrient paste, all of it spread over the tiles at Hush's feet. He stepped back and looked at me. Iron mask. No emotion, no irritation, no disgust. Only a simple, indifferent stare. I lay on the floor, wheezing and coughing, pretending to convulse, and stared at his legs. Metal, reinforced, with joints that bent the wrong way. He stood another second, then turned and left. Vomit on the floor was an orderly's problem. Let the orderly clean it. I lay in my own vomit and smiled. Yellow teeth, half of them chipped, in acidic sludge, and a smile on my lips. The first in months. The syringe was safe. My plan had not failed. The master left. An Archon's feast is an event that happens rarely. The racks went with him, all but 2 guards on the upper levels. The laboratories emptied. Everything around was quiet. No screams, no buzzing of instruments, no humming from the master, only the growl of ventilation and a distant rhythmic thud, the heartbeat of walls. I stood in the corridor and listened and understood. This is my chance. Now or never. There may be no next time. The master may complete the transformation sooner. He may begin the lobotomy, and then whatever remains of Mara will dissolve. The last spark will go out, and only a grotesque will remain under another serial number. I walked the corridor with the syringe in my hand. I wanted it to be the last human act I was still capable of. My palms were wet with fear. The walls breathed around me. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. I walked in their rhythm. One step on the inhale, one step on the exhale, as if in a dance, as if in prayer. Past cages where other prisoners slept, those still waiting for their turn on the table. Past the nook where the tongues sat in a circle and whispered. Past the disposal unit humming its lullaby. Mara's cage was at the far end of the holding block, a biometric lock tuned to the racks, but I had noticed long ago that locks here age as everything else ages. The mechanism sticks if you press the third plate and turn. I did it every time I came with dressings. Click. The door slid aside. She lay on the floor, enormous. Each time I forgot how much she had grown, over 2 meters. Muscles bulged across the body. Bone spines stuck from her back and had torn through the remains of her clothing. The blade arms were pressed to her sides. The red sensors were dark, sleep mode. In the silence I heard only 2 sounds. The hum of ventilation and her breathing. Hoarse, heavy, like the breath of a sick animal. I crouched beside her and put my hand on her shoulder. The skin was hot and rough like sandpaper. Beneath it, muscles rolled reflexively like snakes in a sack. The sensors blinked on. Red points turned toward me. She lowed softly, questioningly. I hope she recognized me. That shard of consciousness that still remembered smells, voices, stories about a servo skull. Mara, I said, my voice trembled. I am sorry it took so long. I looked at the syringe, the violet liquid in the clear cylinder, then at her, at what they had made of her, a body that had stopped being human, a mind crumbled into small fragments, and somewhere under all of it, under the stimulants, under the implants, under iron and bone, a tiny, barely living spark of who she had been. I found the place on her neck where the carotid artery had once been. Beneath the skin were tubes and wires, but between them there was a patch of clean tissue. Enough. The pulse under my fingers was fast, uneven, alive. I am sorry, I said again. The needle went in easily. The skin here had become thick, but the needle was Drukhari, sharper than anything human hands can create. I pressed the plunger. Half a liter of dark violet liquid passed from the syringe into her body. 3 seconds. The red sensors flickered, then flickered again and went out. Her body relaxed. Muscles that had been tight as cables went slack. Her breathing, hoarse and heavy, stopped. The huge rebuilt chest with ribs jutting outward stopped rising. Even the walls seemed to stop breathing. Even the ventilation fell silent. The whole world paused. And in that pause there was peace. Real peace, something that simply does not exist here. I sat beside her and listened to that silence and smiled for the first time in years, for the first time in an entire life spent here, through hundreds of shifts and thousands of buckets of blood. My lips stretched by themselves and I could not stop them, and tears ran too on their own. Warm, salty. I had done it. The only good thing I still could do. I had given her what cannot be received here. A quiet end. For 4 minutes I sat beside the body of Mara Thorne. I kept my hand on her shoulder, and the shoulder cooled beneath my palm, and I believed I had done the right thing. For the first time my hands had done what they were made to do, not harm, spare suffering, grant true mercy. What counted as mourning in this place began as usual. The growl of ventilation, the thud of the wall's heartbeat. I rose, put on my apron, took the mop. My hands trembled again as they did every morning, but this time the trembling was different. Not the familiar fine background tremor, but a large, heavy shaking that made the mop knock against the floor. I knew destruction of material was punished harshly. I knew what might await me, and I thought I was ready. Such an existence cannot go on forever. I reached the operating chamber and pushed the door. It yielded with a soft, wet smack. Living hinges contracted. I stepped inside and froze. Mara lay on the table, alive. Her chest rose and fell. The red sensors burned bright and steady. Her body was connected to machines, tubes and wires running from them. The machines beeped softly, and in that beeping I recognized the rhythm. A steady pulse, stable, better than before my injection. The master stood beside her. He turned to me, and I heard a sound I had never heard before. The master was laughing. Softly, dryly, like the rustle of paper, like sand rubbing against glass. All four hands were folded before his chest. The spider legs tapped the floor with measured patience. It took me several seconds to understand. He had known from the beginning. Maybe cameras. I had seen little lenses in the corridors like insect eyes and always thought them decorative. Maybe sensors in the walls, in the floor. Maybe the walls told him. He knew I had stolen the lethe salt. Knew I would come to her. Knew I would inject the heartstopper. And he allowed all of it because he was interested. For him it was an amusing experiment, nothing more. The master came to me and bent low. When he leaned, the spinal tail curved like a whip. His breath smelled of formaldehyde and floral notes, the same flowers the Druckery hands had smelled of when they seized me on the Grace. Perhaps that is their scent, I suddenly thought, the scent of a race that lives by feeding on another person's pain. He spoke in Gothic for the first time. Broken, archaic, with an accent that cut the ear but understandable. He pronounced every word separately, as if laying beads into a necklace. 4 minutes, he said. Her heart did not beat for 4 minutes. The tissues had time to soak. He selected the word, the way he selected instruments from a row on a rack. With horror. The chemistry of fear of non-being. Adrenaline, cortisol, neuropeptides, everything on the threshold. The entire body screaming without a voice at the cellular level. When we drew the spark of life back with the Coven Reanimator serum, the one that makes death temporary, the concentration was exquisite. The tissues became more pliant. The neural pathways more flexible. The muscles accepted stimulants 20% better. He straightened and looked down at me, mercury eyes still and bottomless. Thank you, orderly. You conducted an experiment I had not thought of myself. Killed to improve. Intermediate death as catalyst. I will record it in the protocol under your name. No, perhaps under mine after all. He turned and left. 4 hands fluttered in the air. He was already planning, already designing, already humming that same elusive melody. I stood in the doorway of the operating chamber and looked at Mara. At her living, breathing body connected to machines. At the red sensors that slowly turned toward me. She was looking at me. I do not know what remained of Mara Thorne by then. I do not know how much consciousness still smoldered behind those lenses. But what I saw in her gaze, if gaze can be said of a pair of mechanical sensors, was clearer than any word. Hatred. Pure, silent, animal hatred for me. I had promised her an ending. I had come with a needle and a gift. She had relaxed, let go, allowed herself to leave. 4 minutes of peace. 4 minutes when pain finally fell silent. 4 minutes when nothing hurt, nothing pressed, nothing grew inside her. Then they dragged her back from that desired state, returned her to the body that was her prison, returned the pain, returned everything she had wanted to escape forever. And of course, the one guilty was me. The one who brought water, the one who changed dressings, the one who told funny stories to distract her from suffering and gnawing pain, the one she had trusted. I had stolen the only thing she had left, the only exit. The bucket I was carrying slipped from my hands and clattered across the floor. Cloudy water spread out. I did not even bend to pick it up. I stood and stared at the red points of the sensors that stared back at me. And in that gaze was everything, a sentence that did not need to be spoken aloud. After that, I returned to work. I simply kept working and waited for my fate. I had no idea what awaited me now, or what decision the master had made. Until then, mop, cloth, bucket. Wash floors in the morning, feed walls by day, clean the operating chamber in the evening, sleep by the disposal unit at night. Routine, something you can wrap around yourself like a blanket. Routine does not care what you feel. I stopped going to Mara. Another slave changed the dressings. A young man recently arrived, one of those who still flinched from every shadow. He did not know who she was, did not know what she had been. To him she was only a specimen in a cage, one of many. He changed the bandages and left without lingering. That was right. Time passed. I do not know exactly. I am not sure. Several shifts, perhaps several dozen. Time again became a black rectangle without beginning or end. I washed, scrubbed, carried, poured. My hands moved. My head was empty of thought, like a tin can. The shape remains, but there is nothing inside. Once in the disposal room, I met another old slave. A thin, wiry man without a left ear. His name was Silas, and he was the only one I sometimes spoke with. Silas worked in the neighboring block under another Haemonculus, a younger one he called the painter. "Heard you made a name for yourself," Silas said, sitting on an overturned bucket and chewing a lump of nutrient paste. "What are you talking about?" "The whole tier is talking. The orderly poisoned the specimen, and instead of punishment the master was delighted. A new method, intermediate death." Silas spat. "Congratulations, you became useful." "I did not want to." "Who does?" He looked at me. "Here it does not matter what you want. What matters is what you did, and what you did was this. You gave the master an idea. An idea is worth more to a Haemonculus than 1,000 slaves. Now he is watching you, and when a Haemonculus watches you, it is either the end or the beginning of something grand. There is no third choice." "The beginning of what?" Silas grinned. He had 4 teeth. The rest were metal pins driven into the gums. "I have a friend, had a human, a medic like you, worked for the painter 12 cycles. Then the painter offered him a promotion. Mask, gloves, a place at the table." Silas paused. He accepted. Now he has 4 arms and no face. Walks behind the painter like a dog, hands over instruments, cuts when told, eats when allowed. Alive, healthy, fed, free of cages. Silas considered for a moment. Happy, perhaps, if whatever he has instead of a brain can still feel something like an emotion. I said nothing. "Run if you can," Silas said, "though where would you run? Nowhere. A fool's advice to a fool." He stood, picked up his bucket, and left. I remained sitting in the disposal room, and the disposal unit hummed its lullaby to me, and I thought, so this is it. This is where everything had been leading from the beginning, from the moment Hush saw my hands through the bars of the cage. They were not looking for an orderly, they were growing an acolyte. The master began inviting me to operations more often. Before, I only cleaned afterward. Now, during the nightmare procedures themselves, I handed instruments, changed swabs, held clamps. I stood beside the table where the next specimen lay and watched 4 hands take the body apart into components and assemble it anew. And here is the frightening thing. I began to understand. I saw the logic in every incision. I saw why this nerve had to be redirected exactly there. Why this bone had to be reinforced exactly so. A medical education is a curse. It does not allow you not to understand. Once the master stopped in the middle of an operation and looked straight at me for the first time. His mercury eyes fixed on my face. I stood with a shining clamp in my hand, and my hands did not tremble. They trembled only in the mornings with a cloth in them. At the table, no. At the table my hands were calm, certain, precise, as if the body knew, this is your place. Here at last you stand where you belong. The master nodded slightly, the faintest movement of the chin, then returned to work. That was the first time he acknowledged me. Owen March, former medici. Hands that know where the nerve lies. Eyes that see how pain works and do not break from fear at what they see before them. That night I lay again beside the disposal unit that had become almost dear to me and could not sleep. The hum that usually soothed me seemed too quiet. I kept remembering that nod. A tiny gesture. A second, nothing. And inside me something shifted, like a stone that had lain in one place for hundreds of years and suddenly rocked. I lay there and thought about the oath. About the boy who had stood before an instructor in medical school on Calder 3 and repeated the words, "Do no harm." I no longer remembered the instructor's face. It had worn away like the emperor's profile on Walter's coin, but I remembered the words, "Do no harm." 3 words. And what does do no harm mean here, in a place where every breath is participation in another person's pain, where my very existence is a function of another person's suffering? Every day I live, I feed the walls, I clean after surgery, I hand over instruments. Every day is a small yes, an agreement with what happens around me. Silent, submissive agreement. Can one do no harm if one is part of a machine of horror? I found no answer. The disposal unit hummed. The walls breathed. Somewhere far away a grotesque roared. The final operation on Mara lasted 12 hours. This time I was not present. They did not call me. For the first time in recent cycles, I washed corridors, fed walls, cleaned the disposal unit. Routine. The hands worked, the mind occupied itself with work. Then from the void I heard a roar. Low, vibrating, making the floor slabs tremble and condensation quiver on the ventilation pipes. A roar with nothing human in it, only animal rage. A sound that made me want to fall to the floor, curl up, and cover my head with my hands. Ancient primal fear sewn into the spinal cord. Predator near. Death near. Run. The operating doors flew open and struck the walls. The living hinges burst with wet pops. She came out. 3 meters tall, knots of muscle beneath gray, cracked skin. Bone spines from back, shoulders, forearms. Blade arms longer than before, curved, shining, serrated. And on the face a mask. Solid black iron, without eyes, without mouth, without anything. Only 2 red sensor points burning in slits. A grotesque. Specimen 409. Complete. The master stood behind her. All 4 hands rested loosely at his hips. Satisfied. I saw satisfaction in his posture, in the tilt of his head, in the barely visible sway of the spinal tail. An artist who has finished a painting. A sculptor who has removed the last unnecessary detail. Test the reflexes, the master said to one of the racks. The rack stepped toward the grotesque and jabbed an electroshock into her thigh. The grotesque roared, that same sound that shakes the floor, and struck. The blade cut the air so fast I saw only a flash. The rack was hurled into the wall. He slid down it, leaving a wet trail, and could not stand at once. But after a minute he moved. Racks are durable. They are made that way. The master nodded with satisfaction. Now a living target, he said, and looked at me. I stood with a bucket, in an apron smeared with other people's blood, with a cloth in my hand. Past 40, looking 60. Stooped, thin. Stand, the master said. I stood obediently. The grotesque turned her head. The red sensor points found me, fixed on me, and that body, that mountain of muscle and bone, moved. 1 step, a second, a third. The floor hummed beneath her feet. Each step sent a tremor through my knees. I could not run. Do not think me brave. I froze because my legs would not obey. Or perhaps somewhere inside, some part of me wanted the whole nightmare to end, wanted her to do to me what I had meant without her consent to do to her. Perhaps I wanted the circle finally to close. The blow came. The blade struck flat like a palm. The impact slammed into my chest. It lifted me into the air and threw me. The wall met my back and I heard the crack. 2 ribs, maybe 3. I knew that sound. I had heard it dozens of times on the 3rd Grace when sailors fell from scaffolds, dry like a broken branch, and then pain, blinding, flooding from back to chest and back again. I lay on the floor. The ceiling spun before my eyes. It hurt to breathe. Each breath like a knife between the ribs. The taste of blood in my mouth, familiar as home once long ago. The grotesque stood over me. 3 meters, a shadow blocking the light, red sensors motionless and dead, looking down. She recognized me. I want to believe that. I want to believe that somewhere beneath the iron mask, beneath the stimulants and lobotomy, Mara Thorne, Lieutenant, Logistics Service, Battleship Implacable, still remembered. Remembered the water I brought, my stories, the 4 minutes of peace I gave her and struck me for it. I want to believe that. But I am a medic, or at least I was once. I understand that after lobotomy nothing remains, nothing at all. She struck because a living target stood before her, that is all. The master whistled, thin and piercing. The grotesque froze, turned and walked to him, obedient, willless. Number 409. The racks picked me up and dragged me somewhere. Pain swam in red circles before my eyes. My ribs grated. I woke on the table, the same table I had washed every shift. I recognized the ceiling, the lightning-shaped crack above my head that I had seen 1,000 times. I recognized the stain on the left wall, that same phosphorescent green I had never managed to scrub away no matter how many times I tried. I recognized the smell, almond antiseptic, instrument steel, formaldehyde. The master bent over me, 4 hands, black eyes without pupils, an icy smile on a face not made for smiles. He spoke in Gothic, slowly choosing every word. You have talent, little orderly. One of his lower hands touched my chest where the ribs were broken. I hissed from pain. He paid no attention. Long icy fingers examined the fracture. I felt a click. He set the rib with one movement carelessly, as one straightens a collar. Pain flared and faded. You understand anatomy. You see how pain works. You know where the nerve is, where the vessel is, where the point lies at which everything ends. And you did not break. After so many cycles, you did not break. The others break. You do not. He straightened and took something from the rack. Small, metallic, dull shining. Enough washing floors, he said. Time to take real instruments in your hands. Time to become an acolyte of the coven. He laid it before me. An iron mask, faceless, with slits for the eyes. Beside it, thin metal gloves with reinforced fingers. Surgical instruments, the same kind I had handed to others. Now they could be mine. Or you may refuse, the master added. His voice did not change. The same papery, creaking monotony. I will put you back in the cage, and in a week you will be on the table. You will become part of the wall. You will breathe and moan like the others for 1,000 years, perhaps longer. Walls live a long time. Choose orderly. Choice, as you yourself know, is an unheard of, rare, precious luxury in this place. He left, the door closed. Living hinges, already new in place of those that had burst, smacked softly. I lay on the table, and my gaze rested on the mask, on the gloves, on my own hands, bare, scratched, with broken nails and calluses from hellish work. Hands that had sworn to do no harm. Hands that had brought water to those in need. Hands that had injected poison without being asked. Hands that had passed scalpels and held clamps, that had not trembled at the table, that had seen and understood and memorized every movement of the master. In the pocket of my apron lay Walter's coin, bent with the half-worn profile of the Emperor. I clenched it in my fist. The metal was warm from my body. The Emperor looked aside, half profile, half smile, or was it? The coin was worn too smooth to tell. Perhaps it was not a smile. Perhaps it was a grimace. Perhaps he was in pain too. 10,000 years on a throne. Try not to grimace. A strange thought. Why did it come to me then? Silas had said there is no third choice. Only an end or a beginning, wall or mask. To moan for thousands of years, or this. Is this life? Number work, is this work? Cutting, shaping, rebuilding other bodies according to the designs of a creature perhaps older than my entire race, making grotesques, doing what they did to Mara. And what had I been doing until now? Washing the workshop, handing over instruments, feeding the walls. I was already an accomplice. I had been from the first day. Every bucket, every cloth, every swab I changed during surgery was my signature beneath a sentence. I participated silently, agreeing to everything happening around me. So what difference is there between a mop and a scalpel? Why am I trying to lie to myself? I understand that there is a difference. I know it exists. Somewhere between cleaning up afterward and creating with your own hands there runs a line, thin, invisible but real, a line that cannot be crossed. Cannot. What are you doing? I pulled on the gloves. The metal embraced my fingers tightly, precisely like a second skin. I clenched a fist, opened it, moved each finger as I once had before surgery, when I was a medic, when I was human, when the word oath still had weight. The gloves fit perfectly, as if they had been made for me. Perhaps they had. Perhaps I had been chosen. Perhaps the master had taken my measurements on the day Hush first turned my hands over through the bars of the cage. Perhaps everything had been decided then, and I simply did not know. Then I lifted the mask. Heavy, cold. I pressed it to my face. It settled as if poured there. Clasps clicked behind my head and the world narrowed. Through the slits of the mask it became different, sharper, like through a sight. I sat up on the table and lowered my feet to the floor. The floor I had washed 1,000 times, which I seemed to know better than my own face. Every crack, every stain, every seam between the tiles. The floor where I had knelt, bent over with a cloth, choking on the vile smell. Now I stood on it upright, in mask and gloves. The door opened. Hush stood in the doorway. He looked at me, at the mask, at the gloves, and tilted his head. 1 second, 2. Then he held out a tray of instruments. Scalpels, bone saws, injectors, probes. I took a scalpel and raised it to eye level. The blade gleamed in the dead light of the laboratory, thin, long, honed to monomolecular sharpness. Drukhari work, perfection. Behind the wall, far through corridors and cages, through walls of living flesh, through the depth of the lower tiers of Commorragh, grotesque number 409 roared. What had once been Mara Thorne, lieutenant of the logistics service aboard the battleship Implacable, roared, and the walls shook from her voice, and the nutrient mixture in the tubes rippled from the vibration. And my hands no longer trembled. For the first time they did not tremble at all. Not in the morning, not in the evening, not at night, not at the table. As if the mask and gloves had closed some circuit. As if the body had finally received what it had been waiting for all these cycles. An instrument. I had wanted to save her soul. Instead, forever and eternally, I sold my own. And now I do not clean filth, I create it. Do you know what is most terrible? More terrible than pain, more terrible than blood, more terrible than grotesques and walls made of living flesh. The crossing, that very step over the line. I expected it to be heavy, expected something inside to tear, to crack, to scream, expected to feel Owen the Medici die and Owen the Acolyte be born, expected a moment, a point of no return, after which the world would become different. Nothing. One step and that was all. The mop was replaced by a scalpel. The cloth was replaced by a mask. The orderly became an acolyte of the coven, the way one changes an instrument, the way one changes gloves. Easy, soft, natural. And from there, from the other side of the table, the world looks completely different, clearer, simpler. The master hummed beyond the wall, that same melody I had heard hundreds of times and could not remember. Now, for the first time, I caught myself softly humming along. The melody lay on my tongue, softly, familiarly, as if it had always been there, as if it had been waiting for me. In the pocket under my apron, Walter's coin fell to the floor, rang, rolled, and slipped into the crack between the tiles. I did not bend down to pick it up. I no longer needed it.